Welcome back to the Uncrustable Worshipper Talk Show with your hosts Edith and Eleanor.
Today we're going to be interviewing 10 different types of worshipers, and they're going to be discussing their stories and giving insight on what it means to be each type. Our first guest is Fanny Crosby. So Fanny is going to tell us how her blindness affected her life and her worship to God.
Oh yeah, when I was about 6 weeks old, I was taken sick and my eyes grew very weak, and those who had charge of me poulticed my eyes. Their lack of knowledge and skill destroyed my sight forever. As I grew old, they told me I should never see the faces of my friends, the flowers of the field, the blue of the sky, or the golden beauty of the stars. Soon I learned what the other children possessed, but I made up my mind to store away a little jewel in my heart, which I called content. I never let my lack of sight lead to a lack of worship of my God. Song of Songs 8, 6, and 7 says, "Love is as strong as death, its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love, rivers cannot wash it away." Over my life, I wrote 8,000 hymns. Though I couldn't see, I knew that God was still good and still worthy of my praise. And I always remembered that I would have my sight in heaven, and Jesus' face would be the first I got to see. That encouragement got me through the hard days.
Thank you so much, Fanny, and that's a good example of what it means to be an unquenchable worshiper. Thank you.
Yeah.
Our second guest is none other than Matt Redman, and he's going to tell us about what being an undone worshiper is all about. So Matt, can you tell us about your injury and what it taught you?
Yeah, of course. One time after I had been playing guitar all week, my hand had started to hurt. And I thought that it was just tiredness, but during the weekend it would become more painful every time that I would play. And I thought, what's happening, Lord? I can't manage for this to happen right now. And a week later, I found myself getting surgery, and I actually had an acute form of tendinitis. And the doctor had told me that if he hadn't seen me then, my hand could have become permanently damaged. For the next 7 weeks, I could hardly do anything, and I sat home with loads of questions. I realized that through whatever was happening, God was at work in the situation. As a worship leader, I was replaceable, but as a son and a child of God, I was irreplaceable. God undoes us in so many different ways, through situations around us, through a glimpse of His glory, or simply by speaking into the situation when we have made a mess of things. He never leaves us that way for long, though. He always comes and helps us. 2 Corinthians 12 verses 8 to 9 says, "3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but He said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me.'" These verses are talking about Paul walking with a limp, which he pleaded to have removed. God had made it clear that it was a reminder of weakness, and Paul soon began to see that it was something that kept him from becoming proud. So instead of being angry about it, he actually embraced it. So that's what it's like to be an undone worshiper.
Wow, that's so good. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, of course. So next up, we have King David here with us, and I just want to ask, have you had any experiences with undignified worship?
Yeah, undignified worship. Yes, I can speak to that.
Okay.
When we were bringing back the Ark of the Covenant into the city, I was overcome with praise for my God. I couldn't help but dance in His presence, not caring who saw me. My wife despised me for it, but I couldn't resist worshiping my God for her approval. I told her that I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I look like or what others think. It only matters that my worship is genuine and that God is pleased with me. This is undignified worship.
Thank you so much for talking with us today. We really enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure. Anytime. Our next guest is a very prominent female figure from the Bible, and she is here to talk to us about unpredictable worship. So, in the home of Simon, can you tell us about what you did with the jar of perfume?
Yes, I broke off the top of the jar of the perfume and I unashamedly poured the whole entire thing on the top of Jesus' head. Yes, it was a crazy thing to do, but it was also a huge waste of money too. The perfume was supposed to be measured drop by drop, but instead I kind of used it all at once. Jesus didn't see it like that though. He thought, oh, she has done a beautiful thing to me. For him, it was this act of devotion, unexpected and unusual, but so meaningful to the Son of God. I worshipped as though I was an unpredictable worshiper, untamed on a quest to see Jesus glorified. Mark 14:6 says, "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me." So Jesus wasn't angry about it. He actually thinks that it was a beautiful thing.
Wow, that's wonderful. That is truly unpredictable worship.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing.
Of course. So next up we have Job, and the question for him is, when in your life did God notably reveal himself to you in a new way?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so I went through a rough patch there for a few years. It was an honor, honestly, though, because God decided that I was worthy to be tested as an example for the devil of a faithful servant of the Most High. And Satan really gave me his worst. I lost everything, my wealth, my family, my health. Over the course of 2 years, they were all taken from me, and I was left alone and miserable. But through it all, I knew God was good, and that his majesty and sovereignty was gonna get me through it. He revealed himself to me in a new way in this season, in a way that he never had before. It was like he had lifted a veil and revealed himself and his character more fully to me. When it was all over, God restored everything to me twofold. And now I can say that my ears have heard you, but now my eyes have seen you. God is always close to us, but it becomes very clear when we have nothing else clouding our lives. When all we have is God, we realize how much we need him every day of our lives.
I really like that. Thank you so much, Job.
Yeah, anytime. Our next guest today is Miss Janet here, and she's been a teacher all her life, and she has a great story to tell us about one of her students. So can you please tell us about what your perspective was on the day of the Columbine shooting?
Yeah. So on that day, I had witnessed the most courageous act of bravery that I have ever seen from one of my students, Rachel Scott. I was teaching in my classroom when two bitter and wicked students entered the classroom, and they had guns and explosives planning to wreak havoc. After hearing what they were doing and why they were doing it, I still don't agree with it to this day, but apparently they were bearing grudges against Christians, and when they had found Rachel Scott, they made the grudge very clear. I had heard so many screams, and I desperately was trying to help students when I saw what they had done to her and what they were doing to her. The killers had shot her twice in the legs and once in the upper body. So as she was trying to crawl to safety, they had grabbed her and asked her a question. They said, "Do you still believe in God?" And her being like such a strong in faith as she was, she said, well, the killers had thought that she would back down and she would be like, "No, I don't." But instead she had said, "You know I do." They did not like that answer, so they shot her in the head after that, and I have never met someone so unstoppable in faith than her, and her worship to God, it was just so incredible. She is what made me turn to God and rely on him, and what turned me to a Christian. I am forever changed by what happened that day, and I really like this verse, and I kind of related it to what happened. It's Ephesians 6 verses 19 to 20. It says, "Pray also for me that whenever I may open my mouth, words may be given to me, so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. Pray that I may declare it fearlessly, as I should." So that's the story of what happened on that day.
Wow, that's really courageous. That is a great example of unstoppable worship from Rachel Scott.
Yeah,
I'm
I
so
agree.
glad you got to share that testimony.
Yeah, me too. Next up we have Jean Perrault. He is a special and talented violinist, And the question that I have for you is, how would you describe being an unnoticed worshiper?
Oh, yes, unnoticed. As a violinist, I went through a period where I was the second violinist because I was not quite the best yet. It was hard because the desire to be first violinist was what I was striving for, but I wasn't there. Everyone loves the violin parts, but that's always the first violin. Second gets no attention, but puts in the work to know the part. I think worship is that same way. We each spend times of worship alone in our room or in our car, and the only one who notices was God. But we aren't doing it for man's approval because they wouldn't know the difference. Unnoticed worship is fundamental because it prepares us for leading worship in front of a lot of people. It gets our heart right with God and fills up our spirit so we can lead out of the overflow. Just like the second violinist puts in the work but is unnoticed, it is in preparation for what is still to come. Jesus pointed out a lowly widow putting in a few coins as a sacrifice at the temple one day, saying that it was more valuable than the rich man's large sum of money that he had donated. The reason for this was because she had sacrificed in private, while the rich man wanted everyone to see his generosity. Jesus says this poor widow has put in more than all the others, and that is what being an unnoticeable worshiper is to me.
Thank you so much for telling us about what it means to be an unnoticed worshiper.
Our next guest today is Miss Susie Jones, and she's here to talk about undivided worship. So Susie, can you tell us about your thoughts and what they were when you came to church and there was no worship?
Of course, yeah. To be honest, I was kind of sad and a little bit angry because singing and worshiping is one of my all-time favorite things to do, and without it, we definitely had to learn how to put all of our attention on the sermon. And I understand why Pastor Mike did what he did, but I was kind of frustrated then. The new approach was we weren't going to lean so hard on those outward things like singing anymore. And Pastor Mike would say, when you come through the doors of the church on Sunday, what are you bringing as your offering to God? What are you going to sacrifice today? And after a little bit, I soon realized that God was all over these actions. By stripping everything away, we slowly began to rediscover the heart of worship. Later on, the worship band and the sound system reappeared, but now it was a little bit different. The songs of our hearts had caught up with the songs of our lips. And what I had learned from this experience is that we should never lose focus of what we worship and who we worship and how we are doing it. Our full attention should always be on God at all times, and we should never have that same problem that we did. Psalm 86:11 says, "Teach me your way, Lord, that I may rely on you in your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart, that I may fear your name."
Wow, that is really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Anytime. Next up, we have Jürgen Moltmann. And how would you describe the feeling of being an unsatisfied worshiper?
Yes, I would describe being an unsatisfied worshiper as the idea that faith, wherever it develops into hope, causes not rest but unrest. It does not calm the unquiet heart, but is itself this unquiet heart in man. Those who hope in Christ can no longer put up with reality as it is, but begin to suffer under it, to contradict it. Peace with God means conflict with this world. Being an unsatisfied worshiper is realizing that you are broken and the world is broken around you, and having that knowledge drives you to make yourself better and make the world better, be a better worship leader in every interaction every day, as you are never satisfied with the place that you are in because you know that heaven is so much greater. But for now, all you can do is make earth resemble heaven the best you can. Psalm 103:5 says that God satisfied our desires with good things, and that is the only satisfaction we can ever have as unsatisfied worshipers.
I really like that, how you tie that together at the end. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, everyone, we have made it to our final guest of the night. Miss Jenny Davis is a great friend of Charles Wesley, and she's going to talk about being an unending worshiper. And can you tell us what qualities in your friend Charles Wesley made him such an unending worshiper?
Yeah. So ever since the day that he was saved, he turned his heart to the Lord and spent 50 years writing 6,500 songs. Yeah, that's a lot of songs. And Charles made the most amazing hymns, and I found myself using them all the time to worship the Lord. And when he had turned 81, he was on his deathbed, and he composed one final hymn, and I actually have it right here. This is the hymn. I can read it to you. In age and feebleness extreme, who shall a helpless worm redeem? Jesus, my only hope thou art, strength of my failing flesh and heart. Oh, could I catch one smile from there and drop into eternity? It is so evident from this hymn that he knew the friendship of the Lord, and for Charles to live was Christ. And because he knew that where he was going after death was heaven, to die was gain. And so I just want to read these last two lines again. Oh, could I catch one smile from thee and drop into eternity? These are the first words of an unending worshiper. Daniel 2 verse 20 says, Praise be to the name of God, forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his.
Wow, that's wonderful. Charles Wesley was such an amazing guy, wasn't he?
Yep, he was.
Awesome. Well, it was great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We have come to the end of this episode of Incredible Worshiper.
Thank you so much for watching, and we hope that you learned a lot about these 10 types of worshipers.
We hope that you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.
Bye!